It says starting preview. Yeah, it's really easy. Okay, it says preview. There it goes. Yep, we're at 17 seconds and counting. Nice. Nice. Hello? Yes. Mm-hmm. It's up to you. Yeah.
Break it or go
Yeah.
blind.
I've been. Mm-hmm.
Right here, and I just like.
Oh, is that what you get to?
Yeah, I was like, no. Just exit out of
Oh, okay. It looks like you can you can see the screen pretty well. Also. Okay. And if anything, okay. Okay.
Is that Joseph?
Do we need, hold on just a second. Yeah, it is. Do we need audio line in, HDMI, and program all on? Just audio line in and not HDMI, or? Okay, so you want me to turn HDMI down?
Test, can you hear it there? Is sound coming out? Sound test 1, 2. Is it hard to tell because it's live here and there? 10. Okay, well, let's.
Check, check.
Hey, how are you doing? Pretty good.
Hello?
Who needs, do you
Testing.
know,
Testing, 1, 2.
who's calling in? Who's calling in? Who needs phone? Oh,
Phone call test. No, that was me. I was testing it. Is this a long distance call? Is he calling in?
I guess he's calling in, so
Okay.
it's close to, well, oh, I guess it doesn't matter if he's calling in, it doesn't matter where, so leave it where it's by
Let me get a
president.
let me
Yeah,
get a
probably
separate.
by the president.
Hey. Oh, no, no. I know. I wanted to like bust out laughing, but I'm like, no, I better be respectful.
Are we supposed to sit in every other chair? We just have like go. You have to sit in the front. You're the boss. I think it's
Test.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm getting better.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, you always look good. Let me watch this wire, okay?
That's all I did.
I didn't know you were here. I'll clean it up for you.
so I guess if we could just call him on a cell, right, Dale? Or puts the number. What should we
That's
do?
fine.
Yeah.
They said he was calling in. I don't know the number, but yeah.
We
Let me
can
get,
just,
I'm gonna
we'll
go
we'll call him, is what we'll do.
I'm gonna run and
So
grab some
then-
tape so no one trips over that, and then we're
Okay,
good to go.
thank you,
You don't have tape on?
But then he's not, if he's going to be on his cell, he's not going to see any of the graphs or any of the,
I know. I've been sending him chastising texts. I know.
so I don't care if we're on the record or not, but did we not change to Monday specifically for Rudy? Yeah. And the superintendent told me that Monday is in fact challenging for staff. Exactly because you said, right.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. We'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the salute to the New Mexico flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo la bandera del Estado de Nuevo México, el símbolo Zia de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas. Do we have the other one, Ruth?
And if we
Do we have the
stay standing for the acknowledgement of tribal land, please.
Thank you.
And here
We
we go.
acknowledge
The original people of the land, the Tesuque Pueblo people, and other tribal nations, and ask them to walk with us today as we share and learn together.
So, Madam President, do you want call him on the cell?
Sure. We are going to call Secretary Garcia on his
You have his phone.
cell phone. I do. Dial 9. Let's go ahead and move on, and maybe we can try him in a bit. We're on to approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion? Does anyone want to change anything?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve. And then there's just something I want to, if there's a second, then I'll go back. Second. So I'm noticing that there's, what? Oh, that there's no board discussion, and usually, while it doesn't have to be there, usually what it does is it allows us to put on something for a following meeting, just by having it there as a stand-up, as a placeholder, just for the future. That's all.
Okay, and I think, you know, we can, I'm always happy to put things on for a future meeting.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to try Secretary Garcia again.
So Secretary Garcia is not here?
Let the,
So I thought it's
So let
Monday.
the record
Didn't we change
show.
to Monday?
oh, if anybody wants to, you know, say this to him.
We'll wait.
I don't understand.
While we're waiting for Secretary Garcia to be on the phone or with us, I do appreciate the superintendent and her staff coming in on a weekend to get this ready on a Monday, when if we had left the meetings on Tuesday, they probably wouldn't have had to come in. Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't, but I appreciate the extra effort.
That is the number I have.
Obviously, you can see the board's going to be testy tonight. Board member Cashman's going to be testy tonight.
Would you like us to start?
It's nice to see Lisa here. Hi, Lisa.
Maybe he'll call in.
Well, he doesn't have the number.
Maybe he should get the number.
Secretary Garcia, hello. This is your meeting. Okay. Can you hear? Yes. Okay. Are you guys there? Yes. Yes, we're here. I'll narrate it. Okay.
Wait. Am I like live right now?
You are.
Okay, can you guys give me a little while so I can call in a little bit when you get back to the middle of the agenda? Is that all right?
Why don't you text me when you're ready and we'll call you.
That'll work. Okay, thank you.
Okay. We are on to the introduction of the interpreter. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So let the record show Secretary Garcia is not here. He will join us on the phone later in the meeting. And on the approval of the agenda, we had a motion by Board Member Carrillo, a second by Vice President Price. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We are moving on to the introduction of the interpreter.
Good evening. I am James Lujan, and I will do the interpretation for translation for this evening's board meeting. If anybody is in need of translations, please let me know, and I will be more than happy to assist you. Me llamo James Lujan y estoy dispuesto a traducir esta sesión de esta mesa directiva. Si están interesados o necesitan esa traducción, estoy dispuesto para ayudarles.
Thank you very much. We are now on to public forum. Has anyone signed up for public forum?
Madam President, members of the board, the last we checked, no one had signed up for public forum.
Okay, thank you. And now, the long-anticipated Finance Subcommittee can begin. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I'd like to introduce a guest that's with us today, our very able lobbyist, Linda Siegel, in case you may have some questions when excuse me.
I'm sorry, were we supposed to call Rudy so he can see this? When is he going to I'm trying to understand what's happening.
I am as well.
Okay.
He has said, and I will continue to, he has said he will text me when he's ready.
Okay, then in the past, I know that this happened with, I remember with somebody else who used to be on this board a long time ago. It became, when that person tried to call in, but generally called in at such time that they missed most of the meeting or were not present for the meeting, they were not allowed to try to request a per diem for the meeting. This was like 8+ years ago.
My understanding is you cannot request per diem for being on the phone anyway. I believe that's our...
No, we can. It's in the policy that we can. You have to be present for the meeting on the phone.
Okay, we should check that. I remember very clearly, and I remember Linda Trujillo asking about whether, if attending by phone, we could get per diem, and my understanding has been since then that we could not.
Oh. Okay.
Would you like me to begin? Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, members of the community, audience that are here, staff. Can you go to the next slide, Ruth? So today we're going to go over some select legislative outcomes. This is not intended at all to be a legislative overview, but those that pertain more so to the budget. Capital outlay. Then we're going to talk about the operational budget only, the impact on the district, revenues and expenditures, the SACs and fair student funding, and budget process and timelines, board priorities, and then open it up for Q&A. We ask your indulgence to write down the page number and write your questions, because some of your questions may very well be answered as we move through the presentation, if that would be okay with the board. Making the presentation with me this evening, Ms. Siegel, if there are things that we left out or that you think we should add on the legislative stuff, our CFO, Herman Martinez, our Deputy CFO, Richard Helford, I'm sorry, and Robert Martinez, who now coordinates or directs our capital projects management. And then we have Cabinet here today, and they may come to the table to join me at various times to answer specific questions that you may have regarding various pieces of the budget. So, regarding House Bill 2, and I'm well aware that you all can read, so I'm not going to read all of it, but HB 2 is our funding bill, and the highlights of that is that we saw an increase of $480 million. You notice that it says a planning unit value. That's what we got at Spring Budget Workshop. We have not gotten the actual unit value yet, and it might be higher. I doubt that it will be less. So a total increase for the state of 8.9%. Other pieces that came out of House Bill 2
you'll see is the 5-year phase out of small size adjustment, and you'll see the impacts to the district in future slides. Okay, extended learning, K-5 plus, minimum salaries for teachers and principals, 6% mandated salary increase, and the at-risk factor increasing from 0.3 to 0.25. Next slide, Ruth. The legislation that is historic and that was signed at Salazar Elementary by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, we're just pulling out select changes. That was a mammoth bill. And, you know, if you would like us, as things come up and they're germane, we may talk about those legislative changes. But the big one was the change to the tiers, minimum of $41,000. You notice the asterisk that was set in HB2. It was not in 5 or 1. And then for the 2 other tiers, $50,000 and $60,000 respectively. Minimum principal salary, there's a range for elementary, middle, and high school, and level of responsibility. That minimum range is at $72,000 to $96,000. Mandated 6% for both instructional and non-instructional staff. What the requirement on that is that you apply the 6% first, and then you get people, then you have to do the delta, the difference, to get them to the minimums. So you do the 6% first, and then you add the difference to get them to the minimums. There's a change to the statewide at-risk factor that I already talked about. And then they're going to require a narrative explaining supplemental program services to ensure that bilingual, multicultural, Indian Ed, and Hispanic Ed acts are being implemented. That will be a new section to the program budget review. So we'll have to demonstrate how we are meeting those needs. Before we get to select legislative outcomes, I thought we didn't include it in this because it really, it tangentially applies to the budget, and that has to do with the Local Election Act. And I'm going to ask Ms. Siegel if you could pass that on to her. I don't think there were any fixes, as I recall, that will help us. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, board members, the fix for public schools is that if you want to hold your election for the next year in the current year, you can do that in November and have a public vote. And the requirements are that the county has to figure out the mill in 2 ways. The current mill, if your bond doesn't pass, and the possible mill if it does pass, and then once the election occurs, then the mill can be changed. It's quite confusing, but it is the fix that allows you to have the election in November and you'll have to have the election in November, be part of the election in November for the purposes of election of board members. And the other positive thing that happened is that there's no more assessment. Remember, the past bill said that community college, public schools, anybody participating in that election would be assessed based on a percentage of their operating income. And now that money is in the Secretary of State's budget, so none of us are going to have to pay for that election in November. So it's convoluted and confusing, but it does. So let's say if you wanted to do an election this November, you could do it for whatever your bond issue is that you would normally do in the next year.
So for us, we have one, I think, in 2 years.
Yeah.
So we could potentially, the following year, do it, or do it right.
And in the right time frame even, since you don't have one for next year.
Right. So we have some time to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the funding, we're going to get to capital outlay. Is there anything else that you think that I should hit? I think there was $2 million for community schools, and I think it's mainly for planning, but it's a small overall amount for the whole state. Mm-hmm. It's very little.
Yeah.
Anything else?
That's
that you think I've hit most of the big stuff?
Yeah, with the budget and House Bill 5 and Senate Bill 1.
So we'd like to go on to the next piece, and Mr. Martinez, if you'd like, yes.
Are you going to be here for the total meeting, or are you going to be leaving early?
I can be if you need me to.
Well, I don't know, because I wanted to ask you about the election law, so.
We could take that question now, so that way she wouldn't have to stay.
Thanks, because I didn't want you to be scooting out. I thought that they had told the school districts that if we held a special election this year, that they would go ahead and reimburse us for the cost of those special elections. So did that get through?
No.
Okay.
And that was actually, Madam Superintendent, Madam President, board members, that was actually never appeared anywhere in any piece of legislation. And a number of schools did put out a lot of money to hold that mail ballot election.
Board Member Carrillo.
So on that, I want to be clear, we're not going to be reimbursed for anything that we did in our mail election,
Correct.
and that nobody even brought it up that we should be. Because that's the really disappointing part, because of our northern delegation, knowing there was like, what, I guess total it was around 180,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 180,000 right back into operational, folks. Did our delegation not even bring this up?
No.
Thank you.
So overall, you can read the numbers. We received, our big ticket item was the generator, and we received $330,000. We received funding for 18 of 21 projects. If you go to the next slide, you can peruse the list on your own to see your schools. We received more than we requested for the generator. If you can look at your slide, we requested 320,000. We received 330 and 800, and then we received 5,000 less for a Sequia Madre playground equipment. We received about 25,000 less for the library resources for Milagro, for a delta of 19,300. Robert, you want to go over the next few slides?
Sure. Okay. So it just discusses the steps, timeline, and reversion dates for these legislative appropriations we were awarded. Before the district can move forward with these projects, there's steps that we have to follow. These are estimated tentative dates from the Public Education Department, the Capital Outlay Bureau. The bond questionnaires will be sent out, completed by the district. I will do those at the end of May 2019. If the bond questionnaires are awarded, the grant agreements will be sent out by PED in June 2019 and will be due back to PED with Dr. Garcia's approval at the end of June. In that case, the funds will be available to the district July 2019, which will be the beginning of the new fiscal year. Moving on to the next slide, it talks about the additional administrative steps that are required in order to move these legislative appropriations along. I will submit a RTOF, request to obligate the funds. If they are approved, the project will go forward, procurement contracts, everything will move forward in that sense. After the project is completed and completely paid out, the RFR will be submitted the request for reimbursement, which requires expenditure reports, copies of paychecks, invoices, and a PED RFR submittal form. The reversion dates for the new capital outlay legislative appropriations that we were just awarded, any project that includes the word plan, design, or construct in the description will have a reversion period of 4 years. So if the bonds were to sell immediately going into the new fiscal year, it would revert June 30th, 2023. All other projects for improvement or purchases will have a reversion period of 2 years. So that would be June 30th, 2021 if the bonds were to sell. Thank you.
Madam President Noble, Superintendent Dr. Garcia, and board members. The next slide is just a highlight of the revenues portion, the impact from the operational revenues. So the funding formula, the specific impacts related to the at-risk multiplier, the small school size adjustment, and the decrease in the training and experience index, those specifically were 3.9 million in an increase as a result of the at-risk multiplier going up. The small school size adjustment is a 5-year phase-in, which indicates that over 5 years we'll have a decrease of those funds. For 2020, it will be about 370,000. Over the next 5 years, it's about 1.85 million in a total decrease. And then in the training and experience index, there's a shift as far as that index where we are not going to be including any of the ancillary or non-instructional staff in that cost index, and that's a decrease of 1.4 million. Once again, the planning unit value is just a planning, and it doesn't specifically indicate that this will be the final unit value, but it's a planning, and so the $4,565.41 will be what we will start the year with as far as that unit value, which we're estimating a projected revenue increase of about $9.1 million. The next slide you have for you just an overall view of the small school size adjustment, and that's within the 910B5, those schools that do qualify currently for that small school size adjustment and those units that are generated. I'll let Richard discuss any more.
So, and I think Richard was going to do that one, but you can see the schools that generate small size adjustment. Now, we're talking about, I think we said, what was the total amount over 5 years? 1.8 million. So it is significant, right, over time. It will catch up. Now, this year, we will be looking at Engage and bringing a recommendation to the board, given the number of students, the fact that they actually they'll never graduate on time. And where most of the students are quite a bit older, would they be better served at the community college? And so I think that is a conversation that we will have. And then the rest, I mean, you know, those are our programs that we will build. I know that the early college school will grow and will continue to grow as the facilities allow. Mandela, I'm not certain will continue, but it serves a very important need. And then, of course, our three elementaries up above. Edmond, slide 11.
So one of the previous presentations, there was an estimate as far as the decrease in enrollment and that impact in the overall revenues was projected to be 2.5 million with a decrease of 237 students. But the actual realized decrease was 158 students. The discrepancy there was basing it off of 80 and 1/20th day average compared to the 40th day average. And so these are averages of the 80 and the 1/20th day. And so comparing year to year, the funding is based off the 80 and the 120 average. And so that actual realized decrease is 1.1 million as opposed to the 2.5 million that was previously projected.
And that is the number that is in stars that the PED will use for our funding for this next year. Richard Seifert.
Okay. This next slide takes the first look at some of the estimated cost increases that we expect to see as we build this next year's budget. The $60K is a placeholder for now. It's that's a modest 2% increase in utilities, but anyone who knows Lisa's work, she'll come up with a more precise number as we get closer to the year, as the more information becomes available. The mandated salary increases, a 6% minimum, and as Dr. Garcia mentioned, we apply that first and then see how close we get to the minimums and then fill in whatever. Those 6% and the minimum increases we estimate are going to be approximately 6.7 million. The increase to NIMSIA premiums, we're currently estimating those to be $325K, and the that's we have to determine whether the employee benefits, as you know, in years past, we've absorbed that and paid. We'll have to take a look at that, or with the input of the board, if that's the wishes for this budget year as well.
So to be clear, this does not include, when we talk about, when later in future slides, when you see what the actual difference is between what we were funded and what we estimate expenses with nothing new, does not have the district picking up the employee's increase. If you look at the high and low plans that the staff would pick, and the dental for the insurance, medical and health. Vision, there was no change.
And it's interesting, 90% of our employees actually chose a high option, which was a little surprising when we looked at it. And who knows if that's going to change with the high getting most of the increase, if that's going to spur any changes in what a employee selects moving forward. But as of now, we estimate the overall cost to be $325K. This slide probably looks familiar for many of you. This was the sale of Alvord, the initiatives that we used with the sale of that building. We barred this in the fall. We bring it back because some of those costs are going to be recurring for next fiscal year. Obviously not the entire amount, but right now we're estimating at 1.5 million to be the recurring that we have to account for in building this budget.
So I want to talk to that for a second. On line, well, they're not numbered, I apologize, but the first one, recruit, recognize, retain staff. Those are 3.5 FTE that we added to HR that were needed. And, you know, for sure, that is a recurring expenditure that I think I would highly recommend that we keep. The emergency management position was moving that vacancy, which became Mark Lewandowski, from a 0.6 to a 0.4. And given the situation in our country and our state around safety, we utilize, and child safety, just, you know, issues that happen with families, we have utilized Mark's position full-time. That one I will be recommending that we bring back. The school safety, the social worker pool, it has been difficult to be able to find the qualified staff given the salaries that we pay, because we're competing with other providers that pay quite a bit more. So we originally had 5, then we brought it down to 3, and the last time I checked, we had only found 1 employee, 1 social worker. So there's some wiggle room there if we want to try on that. The athletic department, that is the person that is helping with middle school, and at present, I can't imagine how Mr. Chavez, with all he does, could have managed without that particular position. Recruit and retain staff recognition, we've reduced that because there was a lot that was already built in. There's always wiggle room there. The PACS program, you can see that to continue it is a significant reduction from 240 to 100,000. The attributes of the graduate is a significant reduction from 50 to 15,000 to continue the pilot there on how we collect the data on those attributes. Extending the district-wide computer and science coding, that 250,000 is now picked up through the ETN, so we were able to make a shift there. Math and science initiatives, we would like to continue that. The first grade literacy, the first year was a kickoff, the second year is the implementation, continue the implementation. We would like to have the 100,000 in that. Continue the restoration of the admin that you had cut. We'd like to continue with that position. restore back to professional development the subs that were cut in 2 years ago. So much of the training is embedded during the school year, and so we do require subs. The school site social media stipends, those have come in handy in communicating, but the capacity contract, given that there might be resources in other places with upcoming funding, we could potentially reduce that one. So that brings it down to from 2.2 to 1.5. Obviously, we'll have discussion, but that's our first brush of what we included in the budget as a recurring expense. So that is included in the estimate that Herman will be presenting to you.
So overall, in terms of the revenues and the expenditures, we are estimating estimating, and this is non-realized, it's just an estimate of 9.1 million as an increase to the state equalization guarantee formula. With the expenditures that also we are estimating or anticipating that we will realize in the next fiscal year. The board initiatives through the Alvord sale, as we just previously mentioned, the 1.5 million, the increase in the NIMSIA benefits of 325,000, and then all of the other two items that are listed in there. The overall projected operational surplus, once again, this is just estimated, of 490,000. This is waiting on the Public Education Department to provide us with that 910B5 funding formula, and then also identifying any additional initiatives or priorities that the board or through the discussion with the other leadership team that those initiatives may need to be adjusted as far as the revenue increases or the expenditure increases. So we'll continue as far as some of those initiatives that are outside of the regular state equalization guarantee, specifically in the K-5 and the extended learning.
Which I'll talk to next, but before we do, go back. Thank you, Ruth. This did not capture, because we didn't capture in the Alvord sale, nor do we have it here, and there will probably be some other things. So this is our first blush, right? We'll continue to refine. We'll bring it back after we have the 910B. We'll have better numbers. But for example, I was just sitting here thinking, the CIS that was done outside of the, you had the amount that was always in the base that was carried over, but then the new amount that was allocated, you would have to subtract that from this. And then there might have been a couple of other things that were added. So we've got to go back and capture that as well, okay? So now to the next slide. This, if Santa Fe Public Schools, what they anticipated we would be eligible for, this could count for an additional $10 million in the SCG. And this is for K-5 and extended learning. And this is an important one that I need some guidance. We're not taking action, but just sort of let's talk about it, because we have a very short window of time. These applications are due April 15th. That's on Monday. They are significant in what we're doing differently or would do differently. This does not allow time for SACs to really chew on it. It doesn't allow for time for the community to really be able to give input on these applications. Now we can apply, and if there was significant pushback, say from a particular school, then we could pull back and not offer it. But I am of the opinion that I don't like to leave money on the table that is there to provide services to our kids. And the PED is affording us a certain level of flexibility this first year. What we have heard is that there are some districts around the state that are not going to apply. It's just like too complex, they're not going to do it. Or they have other reasons why they may not. There may be factors in their community why they would not. If there's more money left on the table, that would allow more schools, because they have said on extended learning, it was like 60% of our schools that they predicated that $5 million estimate. So if there are more districts that leave money on the table and we have a viable program that we apply for, we would like to do it. We recognize that we're meeting with Grace Mayer, who is the president, right, of NEA, to look at the pieces that would require negotiation. With that said, the teachers that participate in these programs, it's not mandatory. And currently, we do not negotiate like K-5 or K-3 plus programming. The teachers choose that they want to do it. Looking at the tables, and I'm going to ask Ms. Montoya, Rael rather, if she would come to the table, please, if we can make room for her. Because I asked her to work with staff on this and look at those tables. This could add a significant amount to teachers' salaries as well as principals in the additional days worked, correct?
Okay, thank you. Board President Noble, Superintendent, members of the board, yes, that is correct.
And so as we look at K-5, we had the original, was it 16 schools, Deputy Superintendent?
Originally, it was more like 13 schools.
So we had 13 schools, primarily Title I. Amy Beal was the addition because the PED had their priorities. But they're opening it up to the entire district. And so I would like to apply for K-5 for all of our schools. Now, what they're saying that they prefer, that it be the teacher but they are going to allow us, if we have extenuating circumstances where the teacher couldn't, that we could have a different teacher. If, let's say, there are not 5, I'm just going to take Asekia because they have one teacher, or maybe Tasuke, right? They have one teacher per grade. So let's say that Tasuke, the 4th grade teacher, didn't want to do it. Well, if there's a teacher from another school that would pick up for that program, I still want to offer it. If I have a principal that doesn't want to cover, I can find someone who's going to want to do it. And so I would like to apply for the K-5 for all of our schools, and let's see what we get funded for. And I think that there are enough teachers that can make it work. It doesn't have to be school-wide. You only have to have one teacher per grade for a program. The second piece of that is for extended learning, there are qualifiers to apply for extended learning. The calendar must either meet or exceed 190 days. You have to have 10 instructional days, after-school program opportunities, and 80 hours of professional development. Well, with the K-5, they will let us apply and just extend the day. We don't have to add the additional 10 days. They're giving you a lot of flexibility on extended learning, that funding to go with K-5. A lot of flexibility there. And it allows us to have the money to provide more professional development, to provide more learning opportunities during the school year. It's going to be a big boon for a lot of kids to have that additional time every day. Now, middle and high school becomes more complex because they don't let us do minutes. You have to add the days. However, we've been told it does not have to be school-wide. We could do a jump start for freshmen for 10 days or for 6th, 7th graders going to a middle school to have that opportunity and still get the benefit of adding the professional development and whatnot. And we could do it even throughout the year. So, those are some pieces that we would have to look at. Now, what's interesting with all of this is that it's not compulsory attendance. So if the kids don't come, they don't come, right? But I think that there would be parents, and we'd only get funded for the kids that came. So we are going to be talking to the schools as we get later into this discussion. We can have a Q&A. But I can just tell you that, and I think we had some pushback and some discussion in cabinet. I think there's some pros and cons. It's not like, and it's going to be a heck of a lot of work for us to get all of this done by next Friday. I mean, we've got the LFC audit, we're trying to build budget, and now this complexity that we got to get done by next Monday. And so, probably have an emergency meeting with the principals and say, look, this is what we're looking at doing. So it is complex. But I think there could be a way that we can benefit our community and try to take advantage of not leaving money on the table. So it's complicated. I don't expect you to get all of this from this PowerPoint, but we will get through it through conversation. Next slide, Richard. It just said school board input requested. Now, no, when we get all done, yeah. But I just wanted to make a point that I'd like to kind of get a toe in the water, like, how do you feel about that? Okay.
So the next slide is going to touch on a term you'll probably be real familiar with in the next month or so, SACs, that stands for School Advisory Committees. They're required in statute to be involved in the budget process. It was a statute passed in 2003, so it's been around for quite some time. We followed up with a board policy that same year. Basically, every school, they meet with that. It's made up of members of that school community, the principal, the staff, and some parents and other interested members of the public. We will try to make a good faith effort to incorporate any of their input in. Obviously, it has to align with the school-based program and services that are being offered at that school, but they will be considered. Okay, another term that you guys are probably familiar with or will be after all this is locked and unlocked. And the locked, as you probably are familiar with, is referring to positions that are automatically appointed or assigned based on school population, based on PTRs, the pupil-teacher ratios, what's in the CBA, what makes sense for that particular school and its size, whether it's assistant principal and the counselors, nurses, and whatnot. We will be having the school budget workshops at the end of this week. We're breaking up into groups of similar schools. All the elementaries will be in the morning session and so forth, so that there could be some collaboration going on between the principals.
I want to comment, though, that we did make a decision this year. Every year, and I think it happened before I even got here, when you apply the fair student funding, we have the same schools every year: Carlos Gilbert, El Dorado, Acequia, Wood Gormley, could be Tesuque, I think. Trying to think which other one. And then the high schools were actually short. And then they give them the money that they need because of economies of scale to make the program run. It reminds me of emergency supplemental for the state for small schools. It's not an emergency. Every year you need this money to make the basic program go. No school had a change in demographic that was going to change what the fair student funding formula looked like based on, all the factors that we have. So we rolled over the budget for all the schools. Instead of making El Dorado or Wagumli, Acequia come back and justify, we just rolled it as a base. And then we told them we're going to adjust for enrollment. So if, we like, and it's not the El Dorados and it's not the Wood Gormleys, but let's just say Amyville. If they had, significantly less enrollment, then, they wouldn't keep the same number of teachers. Now, we've got some schools that we allow to not have combo classes like Tesuque. And there was a lot of push from parents that they, we made that change last year, the beginning of the school year, not in the spring. That if they had known in the spring, they would have made certain choices. So depending on how tight this budget gets, will determine whether or not we have combo classes in some places or one teacher for subbing kids, right? And that's a tough one. And so we'll be taking a look at that. But the fair student funding formula, we applied it, we just rolled it over, and then took care of those that have economies of scale issues every year. So the school-based budgets, and you'll see the timeline coming up here in a minute, will be presented to you on April 22nd. Yes.
Can I just make a comment about some things legislators said around these funding issues?
Only if it works in my favor.
There was a lot of talk about the high expectations about how much this funding is going to help get more school nurses, get more counselors, get more social workers, because that's why the at-risk factor is increased so much, and the extended learning and all that, that suddenly we're going to be able to hire with this money all those people that are going to support these at-risk kids. So just, I know you know that, but just to put that out there, that is one of the expectations that all this funding is supposedly going to enable us to do.
And on that point, he had an issue too.
And on that point, because it's not to a page number, it's baloney. It's complete baloney. They're patting themselves on the back for a job that they didn't do in trying to provide for at-risk. And as we'll see as we finish up here, it'll be a break even for our district. And they're just playing with the numbers and percentages to make it look like they did more than they did. But it's malarkey.
Going back to Ms. Siegel's point, where's the page that shows our total revenue where we show a little bit in the black? What page is that? 14? I think it's important. Well, no, it's not 14. Or maybe it is. Yes. That even though, I mean, the at-risk did go up, and we show you, we got 4.3 million. But you can either say at-risk was underestimated, or you can say salaries were underestimated. But the bulk of this money was gobbled up in salaries. I know, but I mean, but I think people need to know that, and it's something that Ms. Siegel can tell you, that I did get over to the legislature, and I was not well, but we went and showed our leadership, chairs of various committees. Ms. Siegel was great in getting us to show people our concern that there wasn't going to be enough money. And I believe that there are folks that know what's happening with that risk, and I don't think we're the only district that we may show we're even, but there's no extra money to be able to do anything new.
Board Member Carrillo.
And on that, they went completely backwards as to what anyone in this room would do the way you plan your budget. They just threw a number at the problem, and then they decided that that was going to be enough because, hey, 112 million total will look good, as opposed to saying, to really comply with the decision, these are the programs we need, this is what it's going to cost, this is what recruitment's going to cost, and you know what? It's going to be more like 490 million. I'm just throwing that number out there. So they did it backwards. Which, yeah.
So, Madam President, one slide that we didn't provide that we probably, well, go back to locked. Go to the next slide, just so we, okay, right there. One slide that we probably should have put in here, and we can in a future presentation, is that our attorneys who represent us in the Ozzie Martinez case, Center on Law and Poverty, as well as New Mexico Voices for Children, have adjusted the figure of 380 million, when you talk about, inflation and where we were at the, 08 levels, to over 400 million. But if we just use the 380, you can subtract out the 400 that we got or so in new funding, and that's really and that makes sense, like where we all wound up, right? Now there's more money for at-risk, so we could add 10 million to us for, when I say at-risk, K-5, extended learning. Those are it's going to make a big difference, and that's great, and we really appreciate it, and that's why I don't want to leave that money on the table if we don't have to. But in terms of the actual at-risk factor, it did not, even though it generated 4.3 million, the salaries just outstripped it. So these are the positions that are locked and unlocked, just in case you want to ask about that. The nurses, the counselors are based on student population and based on the budget we have. But for example, I know that the board had talked about, it'd be great to have a nurse at every school or a librarian at every school. well, that would have been terrific, but I don't know how you would make that work. I mean, it's because it's that tight. Upcoming dates and process, Herman?
Board President Noble, Superintendent Garcia. So just as an overall, the timeline as we're looking at, I like to look at it from an end point, and then from that point, just gauge it backwards and see if we're on schedule. What the PED had proposed for us as far as the submission of the budget was June 5th. And so we do have a few dates in there already identified as far as some specific items that we would like to present to the board in future study sessions. Obviously today we are discussing some of those specific items that are related to the K-5 and extended learning. At the next study session, potentially April 22nd, we would be discussing the actual revenues and the projected expenditures for next fiscal year. In addition, we would include any of those SAC discussions, any of those proposed budgets through those discussion items, and then also responses to any of the priorities that were identified today through discussion. On the 13th, we would then present a preliminary budget for discussion and potential revisions, and then on the 21st have.
So on the 13th, though, the entire operating budget, because right now we're talking operational, you know, you want to see the whole big operating budget. So we hope to be able to show that to you on the 13th.
And that would be including not just the operational fund, but also any state or federal programs. The 21st then would be the presentation for the adoption, which would allow for us to make any final revisions as needed and then submit to the Public Education Department on the 5th. We don't have a specific technical review indicated yet, and so that may be something that the PED also wants to include for this budgetary process. But within that timeline, we also need to identify any of those specific union initiatives or directions from the board as far as making sure that we meet those needs as well.
And then negotiations will continue throughout this time frame. Ms. Sink and I have our initial meeting with Ms. Mayer on Thursday, and then quite possibly negotiations will start next week. What I do want to mention is, you know, we will work with them throughout the process. Last year, the negotiated agreement was completed, if you recall, after the budget was submitted. You know, it'd be great if we could get it all done before, but that's very ambitious. I hope that we don't have to have like a special meeting. We're trying to work within the study sessions and the board meetings. But, you know, this is a fluid process and complex as heck. So this is more difficult than the usual building of the budget. I think it's more difficult for everybody, just, you know, statewide, because we still are getting, we just got directive from the PED today. We are meeting with the Deputy Secretary tomorrow. He's coming to meet with us, which we're very grateful, at 9:30 to give us more clarification, because we received two different directives that are a little conflicting. And so we're meeting with them tomorrow morning at 9:30. So we'll get more, because you might ask some questions today about K-5 and extended learning that I don't have the answers to. But unfortunately, it's due next Monday, unless by some reason they choose to change that date. We were hoping that we would have gotten these applications at Spring Budget Workshop. So with that, we stand for questions.
Okay, so we do questions and a discussion of our board priorities. As we have in the past, I think it'd be good to go through roughly in order of the slides if we can. Who wants to start? Board Member Cashman.
My first question would be on page 6. So does anybody have something before page 6?
Page 3.
Okay.
Board Member Carrillo.
Okay, so on page 3, and it comes up again, I think, on page, I don't know, 4. So you answer the small size adjustment thing. Okay, on that, is there a chance, probably in the next 3 to 4 years or 5, that that might be reversed in an upcoming legislative session where they'll decide to realize maybe small size adjustments are a good idea? I mean, especially in districts where the total number of kids is 200, which is most of the state. I mean, there's 6 big districts, and most of the state, as you know, is very small, very rural.
Madam Superintendent, Board Chair, no. I don't think so.
Okay.
Because they were really adamant about school districts should not be getting, school districts over a certain size should not be getting the school size adjustment.
So the small ones were taken care of. The
Yeah.
small size
So,
districts.
so it's penalizing us by virtue of the fact that we have more population.
Right,
Got
that's
it.
true.
Okay.
Yes.
Just so long as we all know the whys, right? 6% mandated salary increase. Yes.
I would say I disagree with my fellow board member. I don't think we should be getting small school size adjustments. We need to adjust our schools for our population. The rural areas need that money. They have no choice. We have choice. We choose not to exercise our choice. So I don't think we should be getting any small school adjustment in Santa Fe or Albuquerque or Las Cruces. Yeah, any of those.
For Carrillo.
I love that we can disagree. Still go to lunch. Okay, so the 6% mandated salary increase. So, not going to be popular when I say this, but, it is what it is. This is 2019. In 2013, we did a competitive wage study, an exhaustive competitive wage study. And in that wage study, we brought salaries. The idea was, knowing that we were going to get a lot of increased revenue, how do we systemically sometimes a government will tell a body like ours, here's money to give 4% across the board. But 4% across the board may not make sense if you have people that are earning $13,000 a year and other people that are earning $90,000 a year, right? So the idea is saying, what is this big pot of money, and how do we appropriately and kind of reasonably, if you will, disperse those funds? So we did the competitive wage study, and we found that in most cases, the directorships in those positions that were higher within admin were, with a little bit of wiggle room, being paid within the regional norm of what other people in those positions may be making. When we look at supers in the area or directors of big departments in the area, you could go to, throughout our region and see that it's not as though they're making a good deal less, and we need to bring them up to a rate where we can be competitive. Of course, that's not the case with teachers, nutrition, transportation, janitorial, all these things, right? So I would ask, because you were at all of the meetings at the Roundhouse, or most, and then I have a follow-up after you ask this question, do you believe it was the legislators' intent that 6% be given to even the superintendent of Albuquerque schools, who makes way more than the governor? Probably actually way more than double the governor.
Madam Board Chair, no. In fact, there's a specific language in House Bill 2 that says the superintendent's salary is determined by the local school board. So there's no requirement of an additional amount for superintendent salaries.
But what about those directors that are already making anywhere, and I'm just throwing these numbers out there because I obviously don't have a salary table in front of me, people that are making anywhere from 120 to 150?
No dollar amount. There's
Okay.
just language saying
Okay.
that
And
everybody
the thing
gets
that
a
I might
raise.
suggest, if the other board members would be amenable to it, is to have a 3% increase for the positions that I'm talking about, and that would be left to the superintendent and yourselves to determine where that threshold is. Well, I understand we can.
No, we can't. It's
No.
mandated for all employees except superintendents. And the reason the superintendents were left out, is that our contracts are negotiated.
Right.
And so we're in a whole different class. You could give way more than 6%, or you could give less than 6%. But all other employees, it's mandated. So we can't say
Okay.
employees from 130 to 150 are going to get X percent.
Well, then I would posit to you that, okay, I'm hearing your answer, and it's frustrating, and that I would say that in their inimitable, incredible lack of wisdom, they weren't thinking that, in fact, all of these positions are negotiated in a way because, as I understand it, if a superintendent's going to hire a director of HR, they're going to tell the director of HR that, well, you can come in and it's going to, bless you, the position's going to pay $150, and that person may say, you know something, I just left a job at $150 and I'm moving here, I'm going to need $160. You're negotiating their contract. So that philosophically and in principle does not hold water, as though the superintendent is the only one negotiated. So I just want to be sure that I heard you say we have to give 6% to everybody no matter what except the super.
Yes, and that actually was a moving target. At one point, the legislation said an average of 6%, and that's where we thought we were, and then after the conference committee, towards the end is when it went back to the language that is a mandate of 6% across the board.
And I understand all this, and I think it's unfortunate because we still have so many employees that, based on the region, if we look at nutrition, engineering, custodial, and especially when you look at secretaries and EAs, these people are with our kids. And we still even though they've gotten sizable increases from our district, we still continue to pay them a paltry wage given the responsibility that they have. And I just think it's really unfortunate that the legislature did not fully kind of do a deep dive into this issue and the ramifications, because this is money directly out of operational, directly out of salaries that could really help the people that need it the most. And we can't do anything about it.
Board Member Cashman.
I appreciate your comments, but again, I said at the beginning of the meeting, I guess I was going to be testy. I don't agree with that. I find it hard, you know, even if I was making $1 million a year, you don't know what my expenses are. Maybe I really need 1.5 million because I spend a lot or I have loads of obligations. So I have a hard time saying just because you're making more money, you shouldn't need all that money. I don't know. You could be in Hawk, you could have child care, you could be taking care of family members. So I guess I don't agree with that. You know, I mean, if there's a set salary, then I want to give, you know, what the salary is. But I don't think we should be saying just because you make a certain amount, we don't value your experience, your training, because you don't get to those levels without having, you know, expertise to get to those levels.
Vice President Price.
I don't know what the legislators had in their heart, but I approve of a 6% across the board raise because it also speaks to the issue of gender equity. If you start negotiating 10,000 more for this person or 5,000 more for that person, we still end up with gender equity issues. And so this is an attempt, I think, intentional or not, to try and start addressing this issue. So that's what I had to say.
Board Member Carrillo.
I agree with both of you. I'm not talking about, I mean, what somebody's expenses are, it makes no difference to me. They make up a gambling problem, I don't know. And I completely agree, Vice President Price. It's around being competitive in the region. And that's why I was looking at this the way I was looking at it. Actually solely from that kind of perspective.
But everybody but superintendents are mandated by the legislature at 6%. And please let the record show Secretary Garcia has said he's not going to phone in. I was just updating the record. Secretary Garcia is not going to phone in.
Okay.
moving along, off page 3. Anything on 4 or 5? Because we know Board Member Cashman has something on 6. Board Member Cashman.
So this was on the special capital outlay, and we said we had 18 to 21 projects. Do we know what 3 projects did not get funded?
Yes, Board Member Cashman. One of them was a security put in for radios. There was also, gosh, I can't remember the other 2. I just remember for sure security, and then I believe there were 2 improvements. Yeah, they were playground improvements, I believe, to 2 of the other schools. Yeah, of this, and I think they were like $10,000 or $15,000 that did not get appropriated. Doesn't mean they can't be done, but you know, absorbing possibly mill levy or working with facilities and maintenance. But 18 out of 21 was what was awarded.
So a follow-on question to that, and since you don't exactly know what those projects, how critical were those projects to us, and what was the amount that did not get funded?
Madam President, members of the board, we can get that now, unless we have it handy. I don't want to waste a lot of time, so we'll answer that next time. But I would say that with the exception of the generator, this was a wish list. I don't think any of these were critical. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. We have to go through the process that was outlined in 7 and 8. Correct, Mr. Martinez?
Yes.
We haven't.
And these are just tentative dates. The bonds may not even sell maybe until the next fiscal year. These are just hopeful tentative dates that they will sell immediately.
Moving along. Okay, Board Member Cashman on page 9.
So I could be brain dead, but go ahead and re-explain to me that last bullet again. When you say that we're going to get 9.1 million, that includes our at-risk increase. That's what we're expecting from, I mean, just re-explain that item to me so I know what you're actually saying.
Board President Noble, Board Member Cashman. So the state equalization guarantee and that funding formula, what it does is it adjusts in the at-risk units itself. As one of the previous slides indicated, we went an increase of 0.13 to 0.25 as a multiplier. That generated additional units to the funding formula. When that funding formula then, those total units multiplied by the unit value itself, those total, the estimated increase is 9.1 million, including those at-risk units in the funding itself.
And to be clear, you saw 3.9 million, right? You saw 370,000 that we lost. Otherwise, you could add that to the 9.1, right? And then in the formula, we lost on the training and experience. That could have been added to the 9.1, right? So that's all taken into account when we look at what we generated. In the funding formula is not like what we had a while ago where we showed you the LVORD or the declining in enrollment, right? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to be really clear on what that was saying to us, so we're all talking apples and not apples and oranges.
And the 9.1, again, is an estimate. It's a pretty good estimate, and I, really kudos to the business office that they're able to model and create this, because we don't have the new 910B, and it's very different because of these new factors. There's some districts that can't do it and are still waiting to get that form. So, good job, everybody, in getting that done.
And also, if I may include as well, one of the intents for a future meeting is to show what those revenue trends look like over the past 3 years. So it just, this specific 1920 fiscal year is going to show a significant increase as far as the revenues. But that hasn't been the trend over the past 2 years and may not be the trend in the next 2 to 3 years. And so it may flatline again. And so these, although it's a stark increase at this point, it may flatline in the next two to 3 years.
I just ask a follow-on question then. Would I be, because I do agree with Board Member Carrillo and Ms. Yazzie, who wrote an article in the New Mexican. I'm very disappointed. I like having some more money, but I'm very disappointed. I don't think we have met the terms of the lawsuit by anything of the imagination. We just took some money and said, be happy with scraps, and I consider them scraps. But so that 3.9 million for our at-risk, would I be fair to say then that if I'm looking at the lawsuit, that that's supposed to cover all the bilingual programs, all the additional counselors, all the different wraparound services to get, I'm just saying is if we're giving an at-risk, then those were things that our students needed. They're not additional funding, but plus we needed programming and all of that. And to me, you know, we're not getting much at all.
It's complex because we can apply for bilingual programming, right? But the doesn't make the pie any bigger. It just means that the unit value will go down. More districts apply for bilingual ed, then the unit value goes down. So the amount of money you get is the amount of money you get. Those units is just how you distribute that pie. And what will be said, though, is that most of our kids are at risk, and there was an additional $10 million for K-5 plus and extended learning. So what they did was fund at-risk programs in a very prescriptive way through K-5 and extended learning, and schools had to apply for it. But this year, it's so difficult for many school districts to do it. It's going to be a challenge for us to do it. And that, you know, you could say, you could turn the argument another way, and you could say, well, yeah, the 3.9 million is there. We could do a lot for at-risk. You're just going to have to cut your budget like crazy to fund the salaries. You know, I mean, you could say this one was undercounted, that one was undercounted. We saw it coming. We knew it was going to be tight, and the LFC gave us our numbers, and actually we're pretty close, right, Linda, to what we told them. I thought, at one point I thought we were going to be down, how much, Richard? Like $1.5 million, and then we thought we were going to be down $500,000, and then we thought we would be in the black about $500,000, and that's where we wound up, was about in the black, about $500,000. And so we did our best to bring it to people's attention that was the issue. But you do have to take into account that while it'll come in the SEG, it's by application, is there's another $10 million coming to the district, but it would be it's very prescriptive. It's going to be a K-5 and an extended learning.
On a point on that, Superintendent, K-5, at least unless you're going to tell us something different when we get to that slide, that's a voluntary program.
All of these are.
Right, and so there are kids that need more help during the school year, and we can't just say, well, you wait until, you know, the summertime, you know, it's going to be all through the school year plus summer. And so to say K-5 is a solution to it all, it isn't. It's a small, you know, boost, but I don't.
The only place that it'll help us is if we apply for the extended learning for the K-5, and those kids will have an additional minutes to the day, and we'll extend their day. But do you remember how many minutes we said? 23 minutes a day. Okay, but it's something. It's a little bit more instructional time. with the extended learning for the middle and high schools, that adds 10 days, but it's not compulsory attendance. And so that was really out of sync. So, you know, I think it was well intended, but there's just a lot of pieces that are going to be difficult to make it all come together.
Board Member Carrillo.
So if you haven't read the article that Ms. Cashman referred to, Ms. Yazzie had a really, I think, kind of spot-on editorial in Sunday's paper. And then I had something in the Albuquerque Journal on Sunday, and together they really do make the case for Ms. Singleton, Judge Singleton, not to approve this budget. And I would agree with just with Ms. Cashman that we're falling short on the at-risk. And the example that I wrote down the word dyslexia, because as I understand it, we're required now to have a program that identifies that identifies children and then implements a program to take care of those children in the district that may have dyslexia. But they didn't award any money for that program. It's an unfunded mandate.
We'll have to check.
Screening in first grade, if I recall correctly.
I just have to check. There might be funding, but it won't be.
Yeah, it was passed. It was Senate Bill 398.
But not the appropriation, because I remember reading about the bill, but not the appropriation. It's like the nature of creating a department of early ed, which is just fantastic, but not adequately funding early education. Only in New Mexico would they do that. So I'm done with page. Are you done with?
No funding for dyslexia screening.
Right. For the program. Right.
Okay, beyond page 9.
I have page 10.
Moving, all right, page 10, Board Member Correa.
And actually, based on what we were just talking about, and because I brought this up before, I would say that this entire budget is an unfunded mandate. Because until they have a law that says public education will be held harmless from cuts, we're at the whim of oil and gas. We're at the whim of all this revenue, and people just like, what's her name at our, it wasn't Mimi Stewart, it was the other one, at our conference, right, who was boasting about the 1.3 million additional revenue. Well, all these raises, this 6%, while it's needed and it's important, what happens if? And that means they're going to come back later as they did the last 8 years and just take money back from us. So this is all basically like an unfunded mandate because they haven't locked in their commitment to public ed. So on page 10, I don't know, two things you said that were kind of disturbing. Okay, so engage. You use the phrase, they're not going to graduate on time. But when we developed that program, graduating on time was never the purpose of the program. It was a drop-in program. So, you know, I'm curious. I'm going to look forward to seeing how many engaged kids are dressed in purple and green, or because I know they have their own cool colors, that are walking with, you know, the academy kids. But I wouldn't want us. I mean, I really loved that we'd had a drop-in program for those kids that just felt so hopeless about ever being able to get a high school diploma. So there's that piece, and then
we'll bring data because I think we have to look at where would they be best served and where can they get into higher ed or to the workplace quicker, because we've tightened it up some because it's crazy. If you're 19 or 22 and you have 5 credits and you're earning 1 a semester, this is crazy. A lot of the kids in those years, very few of them, their rate of earning credits was absurd. So then we said, okay, for you to really get, if we think you have a better chance of getting your diploma if you're only short 5 credits. If you're more than like 10 or whatever, and you're not going to be taking 2 or 3 credits a semester, you're better off getting your GED. Because do you really want to stay until you're 25 or 26 to get a high school diploma? No. I mean, because I don't think we're doing them a service. And so I think we have to look at the data. We'll bring it to you. But as we continue to lose the funding for small size adjustment, we have to really look at okay, you've got a lot of other schools that you really want to keep open, and where are we best serving these students?
I get that piece completely, especially losing the small school size adjustment. But the thing that I would ask us to consider is, and I know that we were very vigorous in recruiting and in also counseling those kids that were in Engage in the early years of Engage. And I don't know to the extent, and this is not criticism or judgment, I just don't know personally the extent to which we have continued to really support those kids. Because I know that early on, I think it was Diane was the principal, is that right, early on? I can't remember. And when Joel had the first principal there, that we were on them. It's like about how many credits they took, and you can't be here till you're 25. The idea here.
But I'll tell you, they may have been on them, but that's what they were
Okay.
actually earning. The
I
data
understand.
does not substantiate what the intent was. And so, I want to do right by kids. I think you all know that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have kids holding off to be productive where we can do better by them.
Mm-hmm. And if we can reallocate that.
That's my angst.
Yeah, and if we can now reallocate those funds to be more productive with the money. No, I totally get it. The other thing you said, and maybe you didn't mean to say it this way, you said something along the lines of if Mandela were to not continue.
No, I don't think I said that. We would want to keep Mandela.
Oh, good, because I wrote that down.
I said Mandela meets a very specific need. I said whether or not it would continue at 200 MEM would depend on the facility.
That's what okay, got it. Thank you very much for the clarification. No, I appreciate that very much. And the MEM is students, 220 students, right? Because we've always wanted that program to be like closer to 400.
And the same with early college opportunity. As they get into the demand for that school now and what they're doing is just accelerating.
Yeah. No, that's
so
excellent.
That one eventually will grow
excellent.
over time.
Thank you. That's it for me for 10 and 11.
Board Member Cashman on page 11.
On 11, and you may not have the answer for this, but what happened between the 40th and the 120th day? I mean, did we even know why those numbers dropped so much? Or, it just seems like we didn't have all these kids.
It's not that more kids came, it was the averages that we were using. They were doing a projection based on the 40th day, but the actual numbers for funding are an average of the 80th and 120th, and when you actually did that, the numbers look better. So our estimate was a worst-case scenario, based on one data point for the 40th day.
It's great to have less decline in enrollment. Board Member Carrillo.
On that, I just want to reiterate for the public, because we all know this and probably everyone in the room knows this, our decreases in students has nothing to do with the performance or the excellence in Santa Fe Public Schools. It has to do with a lot of people not having babies. So when we're done with this and you're done watching it, go do your business. And in 5 years, we'll have more kinders. But because that's it. It's not about our losing enrollment. It's because of our performance. And if anything, we've just been excelling. So it's really important people understand.
And actually, we built on that point, Ms. Noble. We actually built enrollment at the high school. We have some kids that have left us that came back, which is really exciting.
Capital's like 1440 this year, but they're equal. It's incredible.
And Santa Fe High too increased.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
And I've heard a couple stories this year of people who have chosen Mandela over ATC and St. Mike's.
And the privates,
and prep, yep. So
I always say when I'm on the radio, choose the Santa Fe Public Schools. The tuition is just right.
There you go, right? Save that money for retirement, for God's sake. Page 12.
On page 12?
Yeah, just totally brief on page 12. And what reminds me of this is because Ms. Randall is here tonight. Can we add to a very brief presentation for the next board meeting, because we haven't had one in so long, the environment CERB basically just update? Because we save so much money every year. That all goes back to the operational. I mean, that department is so efficient and does such great work. And what maybe future plans are for more panels and more composting. And would you guys like to hear, like, for a 5-minute thing from Ms. Randall?
Yes, I think a brief update would be?
We'll let you know which agenda we put it on.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Sorry, I just did that for you, but I always love hearing from you. Oh, the other thing on 12, employee benefits, the health piece. You said the health care did not go up for them this year?
It did. Look on the bottom, there's the new rates, 5.9% for the high and EPO plans, 3.1.
What page are you on?
Oh, I'm sorry. Those are my notes, but we did say it went up. For the high benefit plan, it went up 5.9%, 3.1% for the low option plan.
Okay, and then,
And then what Mr. Halford said was that more employees selected the high benefit plan.
so
And
does that
then-
mean that this year we're going to supplement their income with the 3.1%? Or just that it was optional that they chose the 5.9 or what?
We have, if the board
Would be the wish of the board, yeah.
chooses to us to cover it, then we will look at what people get, and then we'll tell you what that dollar amount's gonna be, if the board decides that we're gonna cover the increases this year.
Because I think that even though they still are getting that increase through PED, I really love this board for the fact that we've always taken care of that in all the years I've been on the board.
Vice President Price?
Yeah, we used to have high, medium, and low. And then if you were in the medium, in the middle, and you didn't get back to them in time, they automatically moved you up to the high.
That I don't know.
Yeah, I'm telling you, they did it to me.
Yeah, now, I mean, I don't know, now I don't know if that's the case.
So then would the board decide?
They got rid of the middle.
How much, the cap? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Board Member Cashman?
I guess if we are deciding that we're going to continue supplementing the health benefit, I guess I would like to know how many of our employees take that benefit, because I know that some take it from a spouse and, you know, they're insured. So I guess what I would be looking at, and I remember at our last board meeting, Ms. Mayer said, you know, we'd like to put some money in the tables, the salary tables, steps. And so I guess what I'd like to know is, you know, of course, if you put it into the steps, then everybody gets it. But if you only give it to people that are taking the health benefits, how many of our people don't take health benefits? What is that population? So you could just have that benefit. And because I do know some businesses, if you don't take the health plan, they give you, I mean, they pay you some money for not taking it because it's in their benefit. And we don't do that because, you know, when I first came here and I started to work for the district, and they looked at me and they said, "You got to be kidding me." And I said, well, no, a lot of places in private industry, if you don't take the health plan, they will supplement your salary. But we don't do that. So I'd like to just know, is it more beneficial to put it into the steps, or is it more beneficial for more of our employees to give them a health benefit?
Board Member Carrillo?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay. Page 13. Remind me again the difference between the first recruit, recognize, retain staff, and the second?
First one is FTE in the Human Resources Department to fund Project Thrive, but that's continuing. I mean, we hired recruiters and whatnot, and a secretary. The second one is more the recognition piece of the programs, like, for example, the National Board Certified Teachers that we did this year.
And one thing I don't think we had in this presentation is where we are with our cash balance. Are we at roughly 5%?
We didn't, but we have, I know that we did calculate the cash balance just based on this. And I think the dollar amount, we can kind of figure roughly what it translates to percent. What was that amount?
Superintendent Garcia, Board President Noble, members of the board. Last we checked, we had used up about approximately $1 million of the cash that or more of the cash than what we had anticipated, in part because of the election cost and the shift of the salaries from facilities that you were all made aware of. That would have brought it down to, I believe 5.3 was the original estimate, so it's like 4.3. Although there are some possible cash offsets. We had a little bit more money coming in June that we weren't anticipating. At the time we approved the budget in early May, we had this late infusion of cash for the SEG that was like $750,000 or so, which certainly helped. That part we haven't factored in. I know on the expense side of it, we're approximately $1 million into that the cash, but we have to look at the revenue side and see if there's some offsets there, and that $750,000 will certainly help. So we'll come up with a more concise analysis of it.
I'm not hearing what our cash balance is.
Everything that we've seen so far, and no, I would say we should be on target. Expenses may be a little bit more than what we anticipated, but our revenue is as well. So I think they may offset, but we'll come up with, as we get closer, by the next study session, we could even add that as.
Richard, you're not telling me.
So,
you should run for
I
office.
think we're going to be okay. Yeah,
I didn't hear a number either.
There's a lot of
I
numbers
heard
going through my head.
4.3 was an estimate.
Okay.
I want to know what
Mr.
Okay.
Martinez.
Yeah.
So then if we heard 4.3, that's way lower than I would think it would be.
That
and I'm
didn't-
wondering if that 750 is going to be added to that, because then that brings us to around 5 point.
It's probably going to be closer to that, but
Five.
I think he's hesitant to give you a number, because then you take that number and you're like, that's what you said the cash balance was going
Yeah,
to
and I-
be. So, and keep in mind that we had almost $3.5 million of expenses in FTE that we switched over, remember?
No, I
That we
understand.
had to fix. And so, as new revenue came in, because they adjusted the unit value twice, that helped. I also held back expending on the Alvord sale. I also held back, we had a lot, we had vacancy savings this year. And so I think that it's going to shake out higher than 4.3, but I don't think we're ready to give you a number today.
And to be clear, I believe
Because you really don't know till the end of the year anyway.
the 4.3 number was without the revenue, was what Richard
Yeah.
said, was without the revenue being
To come
considered.
back.
That was only taking into account the expenditure side, so
I
just to
think it's going
clarify.
to be more than 4.3 once revenue's considered. I think it's going to be back up to what we.
Like around 5, a little more.
Yeah, probably.
Because I know Maureen would
The
have never,
750 is
ever,
gonna
ever
offset for
approved
sure.
ever going below 5.
Well, and that's what I was just gonna say, when we know we're dipping down, I think the board needs to know that, because, you know, Board Member Creo is right. We need at least 5 million to cover, and anything less is very concerning too.
That's our bond rate.
Yeah, it does affect our bond rating, so I guess in the future, if we could be apprised when we're dipping down into it, so then we can say, well, wait a minute, because we all have great ideas on how we want to spend money, but we also need to be responsible stewards and have some in reserve.
Did you want to clarify anything?
Just to clarify and just to add another item for consideration, 5% or 5 million of the overall operational budget, I think, is a very good initiative, you know, as far as making sure that you have or you maintain some of that. I would also indicate that if you do anticipate that increase in operational expenditures or the operational budget in total, then that 5% will essentially increase as well. So we will go from 5 million to 5 point whatever million. But the other thing I did want to clarify was that for the cash balance itself, one of the items that does factor into that is the audited financial statements, which were approved at one of the previous board meetings, and that needs to be reconciled back to the general ledger. And once that is reconciled to the general ledger, we will have an actual figure as far as what the cash balance is, and we can provide that at a future meeting.
So do we think at our next study session, when we dig into the budget, that's reasonable, or is it beyond that? Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
So we're on 13?
We're on 13.
Do you have anything? I can go next, I don't care.
Board Member Carrillo.
Okay. Then on 13, so maybe I thought I listened, but I know that President Noble asked the difference between number will thrive and line 5.
Excuse me, is that the one on recognize and recruit?
They both say recognize, recruit, and retain.
And they do. And one was staff. So we should just, it says staff up there. Oh, it says retain staff. We should say HR. Those are FTEs in HR. The second recruit, recognize, retain staff is around.
Which one is thrive? Which line is?
Thrive is one,
Got
number
it.
one.
Okay.
And then the other one is about things that we're doing for staff to retain them and also the recruitment. And there has been quite a bit that has been done in that area. And we'll either do that as part of a board presentation or as part of my evaluation. We will show you all that we've done around recruitment and retention and, of course, the HR changes.
So I guess when I look at the two, because you said recruit in both.
They both help us recruit and retain staff. HR is actually doing the work, right, in the HR department. Jeff's shop, in conjunction with Howard, also have various programs that we've put in place to recruit and retain staff. Whether we're working with some of our people who are on the visa plan and help it, because that costs money if we're going to try to keep them once they've been with us a few years and they want to stay, then, how do we help them with that? We had a whole program around paying for teachers to get their national board certified teacher credential, which will make them a lot more money. We have funded so that they can take those classes. There are things of that nature that we're doing to keep staff here and to recruit. That's also used as a recruitment tool. We've created new recruitment tools. We've gone to more recruitment fairs. We are paying for more staff to go out to more recruitment fairs.
Okay.
We have new recruitment materials, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes it much more clear. On, you said we may have some wiggle room on the social worker pool because we can't find anybody. We cut it, and I know it's hard to find staff here. I know we cut it from 5 FTE to 3, and that's when I heard there may be wiggle room because we can only find 1. I would ask us not to have any wiggle room, but to kind of really hold that we can get 2 more from someplace, just because we know that we need that in terms of our own at-risk. So that would be a preference. And then on the...
On that point, if I may.
Yes, please.
At the National School Board Conference and in some reading I've done recently, I just want to really commend this board and the superintendent and the staff, because this is clearly something that people are getting to now, and we were ahead of the game, that social workers are a key prevention mechanism in behavioral health. I went to at least 2 presentations that ended up saying, consider funding social workers instead of security. And, if you have a choice, that might be the longer term prevention. Now, of course, we want secure and safe campuses, but I really do think that this in particular was something that we got to very well and very quickly, and I appreciate the work that we did on that. Board Member Carrillo.
So on attributes of a graduate, you probably found the same thing, Ms. Noble, that that seemed to be the fad of the day. Whether you called it the picture of a graduate, the portrait of a graduate, the whatever, I mean, I would say there were at least 10 presentations around that. And then Jay, whatever his name was, the HR guy that spoke on Saturday, he had said that, and I actually left like 3/4 of the way through because it's like, I know all this. Why am I listening to this guy? And I'm going to go get in the lunch line first. And but the thing he really focused on when he was talking about kids not being ready was they can't write their way out of a paper bag. He said, you try to tell them, write 2 paragraphs, a 2-paragraph synopsis of a meeting you had with a client. And they just cannot string sentences together with correct punctuation, capitalization, or grammar. And he said, so anything that any of us could do, because it's all board members out there, we would be doing all of our kids a great service. And of course, that goes in that portrait of a graduate. If you back map all the way to first grade, right? These are when our president doesn't even know how to use capitalization, but when you can teach kids how to use capitalization and punctuation, it goes a long way. So on that, this says for 3 to 4 schools.
We're not implementing attributes of the graduate in 3 or 4 schools. What I'm trying to get to here is how do we measure that kids have it? How do we build a portfolio, to have a vision that eventually kids will build a portfolio from kindergarten to the time that they graduate, that they demonstrate that they have those attributes of a graduate. And there is not currently anywhere really a good evaluation system. What you see around the country is either people put their attributes of the graduate on their website and you're done, or they make a nice brochure on attributes of the graduate and you're done. What we've been working is trying to build this into the curriculum. So right now we have some projects that are going in a few schools we're piloting right now. We're working with Innovate Educate and with Verde Serum to get ahead of the state on assessment for learning, that there are ways to take these projects that are aligned to the attributes and aligned to the ITSE standards, and to be able to measure them and to be able to show that kids can demonstrate that they have them. And what I would like to see our district have is a way where kids can have like a portfolio that they build, electronic portfolio since they're in kindergarten, all the way so that when they get to high school, they can be able to have a portfolio that they're able to show a prospective employer or part of their admissions app, whatever, or to demonstrate to us that, you know what, I have these attributes. I showed how I was socially responsible. I'm able to demonstrate that I can work with groups and collaborate, those sorts of things. And of course, their assessment, right, being able to read, write, math would be part of that, because we said proficiency was important in the attributes, but so are the soft skills. And so being able to measure it and have a way to do that, I'm hoping, right, that the state will be, and I actually got appointed to the statewide assessment task force. So I'm going to be trying to push on, and I've been working with Tony Monfiletto and with the PED. Ms. Rael went for me now to Louisville because I couldn't go. We had too much going on here on building a statewide system. What I wanted us to do is to position Santa Fe to be ahead of the game in this work. So that's where we're going with it.
Cool. Okay, we done with page 13? Moving on. Page 14? Page 15? Board Member Cashman?
So on page 15, I'm in favor of going and trying to get as many of our schools K-5. I am concerned about staff, having the staff there. But one of the reasons I think sometimes, even though K-5 is a great program, we may have problems because it only goes for another 30 days approximately. 20, I know, but I just rounded out, another month. And then parents have that another month between when school starts, between, to what am I going to do with my kids? So like if they go to the city and they join their summer program, then that goes almost to the beginning of school. So you have still, it's not enough that we have this gap that not everybody has the luxury of going on a trip and going away someplace. And so if you're a working parent or even a stay-at-home parent, you need to do something for the whole summer for your kids. So you've covered a month of vacation, but not the whole vacation. And so I think that's sometimes why you don't see, as many kids stay with the program, or we have the pullouts, which is disruptive to the program. people sign up for the program, and then they show up and they only do 10 days of the program, and then we've got too many teachers, you know, I mean, we don't, you know, so I would say, I would recommend that we apply for the grants if we can get them for this year, and then figure out how we can sort of make it more, I want to say mandatory. I mean, I think it's good. I know it's an optional program, but I do really think that if a school is going to do K-5, it's worthwhile that you know you're going to that teacher, the next teacher, and you know, I mean, part of that is building that relationship. And for the teacher to already be on top of, okay, this is where a deficit is, can I get it up to where I need to be? But, you know, this late in the game, I think it may be hard because some of our professionals have already made plans for the summer. This is a big changing, and some of them just choose not to. They need the time for professional development or just for, you know, a break. So, I mean, there are many reasons, but I would say I would recommend, my recommendation to the superintendent is within the short time frame, if we have enough sites, let's try to apply for as much to give our kids every opportunity, but maybe we need to think of more creative ways. If we have a community that says, I really want to do this, but what are you going to do for the other couple of weeks before school starts with my kid, because it's very hard to get that child care component for just a small block of time.
So to weigh in there, I agree with Board Member Cashman, though I think the dance of being a parent with the summer is a bunch of piecing things together, almost no matter what you do. And I think Board Member Cashman is right on in that, and you identified that the limiting factor, of course, will be staffing and how that can work. I became aware that my son had the ideal scenario in the K3+ program, in that he was able to do the summer before kindergarten at his school with his teacher, and it was wonderful because it onboarded him in a way that nothing else could. There were only the young kids at the K8, and there was a lot of outside time and playing, et cetera. Personally, I would love to see us go to more of a full day, full year schedule in school with a lot more fun and exercise built in. I think it's the reality of working families, working people, and what our education system would be in an ideal world. So I would agree with Board Member Cashman to apply for it, and Superintendent, I absolutely trust you to know the limits and how far to push the system, and I would say, you know, let's push it as far as we can and see what happens, because this is really moving in the right direction. It's very exciting to see. And the only other thing, and I know there's almost no time to do this, but if there was any way to engage families and kids around the options, that's always something that, you know, what would help them, what would really meet their needs, what kids would like to see, and I think in a week it's pretty tough, but in an ideal world I would love to have seen our community engaged around some of the options here.
So what I'd like to say to that, Ms. Noble, if I may, is that because we do have to apply and we have such a short window of time, but I think that I'm hoping that this money will continue, and that and I think that the legislature is going to refine this to better meet the needs of folks, but that this gives us an opportunity over this year to try some things out, maybe try some different models in different places, get input from people, how it worked. Why didn't you apply? Would you apply if it was X, Y, and Z? So that in January, when we go into the legislative session and looking at Ms. Siegel, I would imagine that they're going to revisit this. Would you not think? I think they will, and I think that's why they're affording a little more flexibility this year because they're not holding to rigidity on some of these pieces to the level that we initially thought they would, because they want districts to apply. And, you know, we have this conversation in good conscience. If we can make it work, it's really, we can't force staff, nor would we ever. But if there are staff that are willing to offer these programs, we want to make them available. Now, obviously, if, you know, build it and they don't come, that's a lot of data right there, right? And that's good feedback for the legislature.
Board Member Cashman.
And just maybe this might be, if we can't get all the staff we need, maybe if we think out of the box. I know that some schools tend to have some subs that come all the time to that same school. So then maybe we could tap into some of those subs, or, you know, and
I don't think we can unless
we
they're,
don't.
right? I'm looking at Ms. Romero and she's shaking her head.
They have to be certified
Yes,
teachers.
yes.
Because I was going to say, you know, and also too, maybe we could tap into some of our college kids that are training to be teachers for a summer job, you know, that maybe, but.
That'd be great. Make it a grow your own program. Board Member Carrillo.
First, speaking to this issue, I'm not sure I totally understand how they're all paid. So this first bullet says school calendar must either meet or exceed 190 days. So is part of this where we're asking, not asking, are we demanding teachers to work another 10 days? And that, I mean, yes, we're giving them 6%, which is great, and they're going to have maybe step increases, but now we're demanding you work 10 more days. So we're not doing that. Great.
So,
And
but let me but let me answer your question, because there's more to it. On the K-5, if we do extended learning, we're adding minutes to the day, and those teachers in that whole school, because we're opening the whole calendar, went for the school year, we already have a school calendar. So the kids will be there and get a longer day, and the teachers will get paid that fraction of time. Okay.
Additionally, so right.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, for middle and high school that are not part of K-5, to do extended learning, you have to add an additional 190 days, but the kids don't have to come. So that makes it really weird at middle and high school. That's why they're saying offer like a jumpstart program. But for whatever we offer, and let's say the medical career pathway at Capitol High wanted to run I've just thought of that, or some of the career pathways wanted to run an additional 10 days, then the teachers will get paid for that time.
Right.
When we add the additional hours of professional development, the teachers will get paid for that additional time.
Okay, got it. So, great. I would say if we're going to do those things in the middle.
I guess I left something out, Ms. Royale.
Yes, Board President Noble and Board Member Carrillo, I just wanted to underscore that we also can't make teachers do this. It's for those teachers that say, yes, I want to work an extended day. I think some of the ideas that Superintendent Garcia just indicated are very viable and opportunities to really think outside of the box. For example, the pathways, or creating some sort of possible coding for the summer for kids. Some of those things that we know are high interest, maybe for both students and teachers, but just wanted to underscore that this is, again, trying to understand which teachers want to work over the summer.
But so on that, okay, so there's the K3 and K5. There's that, and then
Just
there's the middle.
K5 now.
No, fine. There's K5, and then there's the middle and high. Okay, so first on the middle and high schools, I would say that whatever it is we're going to do that's additional, if it's not around attributes of a graduate and proficiency and certain things, I would say don't do it, because that's where we're weakest. And so it shouldn't be, you know, camp. Okay, it needs to be something that's going to drive us toward our goal. On what you said, which was interesting to me, and you know, I've said this in the past because I think I need to qualify what I'm going to say is that I come from a labor background, okay? So I'm a very pro-union dude. We're the employer. We can make people do what we need them to do. It can be negotiated, and many things do need to be negotiated, but we are the employer. And so we need to recognize that. And if what we need for our children is this, then we can say, well, this is what you're doing, and we can go to the table and we can say, this is how you'll be compensated for it. And so I don't, it's not the tail wagging the dog here. We are the district, and we are the board, and you are the superintendent. And others are in our employ. And that's not to discredit the union at all, or people, or whatever, but it's to just lay in the foundation of where it is for me. And then you brought up something so interesting, and if Linda Trujillo was watching tonight, President Noble, I'm sure she was saying, yeah. So Linda Trujillo brought up a number of times that at some point we should at least have a study session. So I'm not saying I'm advocating for this tonight, okay? That we should have a study session around year-round schools. And then Susan Duncan also, rest in peace, she'd be saying the same thing. Because it's the affluent kids that are doing cultural, educational things in the summer. They're going to the Louvre, they're going to build houses in Puerto Rico, they're doing whatever. And it's those that don't have those kinds of means that often fall a grade and a half behind, until by the time they get to grade 8, it's just too late. And so it might be something that at some point we have a study session around, and just all of us researching on our own, and we have staff bring something. Because when we think about it, and this isn't debatable, the whole idea of having, our schools were built on first an agrarian model, having summers off so everyone could work the farm, and then they were built on an industrial age factory model. Let's line it up in a row and make good widgets and, manufacturers out of them. And what we learned, and like there were more sessions than not in Philadelphia this time around, we have to change, we have to adapt to our kids and the way they're learning. And so that might just be something, we can discuss that at some board discussion sometime, whether we want to just approach that subject. And I know that we're a tourist-based economy, so that could be really difficult. But at the same time, we're here for our kids. And if we're always putting them first, and studies show that, in fact, they really excel in year-round schools, especially kids where you have more at risk and lesser means, that may be something we almost have an imperative to do. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I hadn't thought about that in a long time.
Anything else from the board? Moving on. SACs on page 16. Fair student funding on page 17 and 18.
The only thing on fair student funding is I remember when we first implemented this, and I know it's been really hard, and the idea was to hold schools harmless for no more than like 1 or 2 years, and that they really did have to figure out how to make it work with the money that they had. Now, I don't want any school to go without, but I just was remembering when we implemented it, why we did, and that was going to be like, the cutoff was 2 years of.
I think it makes sense, may I? Didn't get your permission here. Try to go through the chair. But, I don't think that, it makes a lot of sense. I really like the concept a lot. I really do, because it's very equitable and whatnot. But it just reminds me of the state equalization guarantee and these small little districts that were every year were an emergency supplemental. And I kept saying, this is not really an emergency, and it's just now of recent times that they're saying they're going to give them an additional money because of economies of scale. And I don't care what you do, there's some of those schools, they're not going to generate what they need on the fair student funding formula to run a school because of economies of scale. There's, you could tell them to try to figure it out. They just can't get blood out of that turnip.
I hear you. Thank you.
Any questions on 19, on the upcoming dates and process? I appreciate this a great deal. Thank you very much. And as a point of privilege, I would ask that this presentation be emailed to Secretary Garcia with a highlight of this page, that the upcoming dates and processes.
So are we having a meeting on the April 22nd is going to be a Finance Committee meeting? Is that correct?
Correct.
Got it. Just want to make sure. And then
we hope to. This is ambitious, like I said. I might have to come back to you and say, you know what, we bit off more than we can chew, and we're going to need another meeting.
No, and if that happens, that's cool. So but we're going to not just make that a tentative thing, we're going to schedule it, and then it may not happen based on. Okay. On the 13th, let me try that again. On May 13th, same, well, that we're definitely going to have, because then after that, you guys go to the state, right?
Well,
Okay.
the 21st, for sure, we have to bring it to
Okay.
you at that board meeting.
Okay.
'Cause that's your last board meeting in May.
Right.
Now, I think, did we ever have to do, one of the years, I know we had a special meeting just to do something on the budget, since I've been here. But I'm hoping, I mean, we're going to do our best to get this done on time, so that we have plenty of time to put everything in the right format to get to Pat on the 5th of June.
We did have a special meeting one time, and it was like middle of June, because you needed us to sign off on something, and we all came in for 20 minutes, voted, signed off, and called it a day.
I thought we did.
Yeah.
But we're going to try our best to adhere to this.
Board Member Carrillo.
I mean, you present it in terms where it's super understandable. Sometimes, in the past, it's just hard sometimes with graphs. As much as we love colors and graphs, and they're really pretty and everything, sometimes delivering information this way is just right to the point, and I just want to thank you very much, because I know you guys came in over the weekend, and you worked super hard, and I just thank you very much for kind of making our district a flagship district in the state for the way we were able to handle and do our money.
Board Member Cashman.
So on page 20,
The key thing. I was going to ask. I figured you had a list.
And so I actually have 9 priorities, but only seven are listed on my sheet, because 2 more I came up with after I read what we got from Joe Guillen. So the 2 that aren't on there is, of course, we're going to have spending on this dyslexia screening for our first graders. That was in Senate Bill 398.
Ms. Siegel.
I was just looking at this dyslexia bill, and it looks like it has suspended the implementation until funding in the next session. But I will clarify that, because it was some kind of amendment made in the Education Committee.
And then the other thing that I had on was, I don't know that we're going to do it, but if we are going to have students be able to have medical marijuana, which as Senate Bill 204 allows, then do we need to have, controlled containers or safes or something for that? But so some of these, if you go through them, you'll see that they've already been addressed by what was already in the presentation. But what I am concerned about is item number 2. We have the listing of the things that we said were reoccurring from the Albert sale, but the board also went ahead and did one-time funding, but some of those one-time things we may want to have become reoccurring. We knew we didn't have enough money to do everything.
That's what I mentioned, that we left them out, like
communities-
CIS.
like communities in
So we'll need
school.
to go back
So-
and look and add those to the next presentation.
And then I think we probably are going to need, based on what Ms. O'Brien said at our last session on teen vaping, it sounds to me like we're going to need money for some sort of program, whatever that is, but that would be a priority, I would think, because if our kids are getting addicted, that's definitely a health concern. So anyways, these are my priorities, and they may not be the board's priorities, but I always go through and try to think about what we've talked about all year long. The only thing on number 7, because I know that I talked with another board member on the purchase of a vehicle for ROTC. I don't think we should be purchasing any vehicle for any one program, but if we don't have enough transportation, then we do need to purchase, and I know this is different type of funding, but we may not have it, and we may have to take it out of operational dollars, but it concerns me, and I know we're not doing it as much anymore, but even when my girls were students here, to have to go to an athletic event that's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and because there wasn't enough transportation, they left at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's a whole day of school that's been wasted. Or because there's not enough transportation, they don't get home until midnight, and then they have to be at school. You know, so if we don't have enough specialized vehicles, we may have to figure that out, but it may not be a problem, so just.
Dr. Garcia, did you want to?
Well, on that
Board
particular
member
vehicle thing,
Carrillo.
maybe you can get, because you just know everybody, maybe you can get new Senda to just wrap a Suburban with a big new Senda, because they're such a great sponsor. You do never know. They've been so wonderful to our district.
It could happen. On number 5, we talked about this today, and Ms. Wagner informed us that the lease is not up for another year where the alternative program is. And she also needs this year to do whatever remodel that we're going to need to accommodate it. So it will not be fall of 2019, it'll be fall of 2020. And then we'll come back to you with, you know, answers to all of this.
Like I said, the board hasn't seen this or weighed in on it, so this might not be board priorities at all, but these are my priorities as a board member. And of course, my first priority is always safety and security. So if we need more stuff or to do something, then I think, you know, for me, that would be my number 1 priority, to make sure our kids.
Were there 2 you wanted to mention? You said 9.
The 2 that I mentioned that weren't on there, number 8 was the dyslexia program, and number 10 was medical marijuana.
Got it.
They just jumped out at me when I was reading what Mr. Guillen had sent us, and so I thought, oh, we might have to do something.
We're going to issue bongs to those people, right, that need the medical marijuana? No. Okay, so on number, I agree with a lot of these. Thank you very much for doing this list. So for the board, I had planned, just as a parent of a teenager in Santa Fe, I had planned on going to the city council meeting tomorrow to just ask, to tell the council what a concern vaping is. And since we have this letter, if you want me to hand deliver it, as a board member, I can hand deliver it then, because I'm sure we can get it before tomorrow night, because he lives here. But I mean, I'd be happy to hand deliver it that night. But as a parent, I want to go and let them know just what a crisis this has become. And so I just wanted to give you guys the heads up that I'm speaking as a parent when I go. And thank you for this list. This is great.
I did actually have a couple budget priorities, and I appreciate this list as well. I would like us to look at secretary salaries. I mean, I think we need to look at all of our staff, but I think our secretaries may be falling behind, and just look at it. I would also, and I guess mine comes in maybe even a request for information as we go forward. You talked about bringing back the other one-time funding issues. We talked about the cash balance in our reserves. And the other thing that I would really like to see and understand in some form is our stipends, and how we're using stipends.
And they're pretty much negotiated.
Okay. And I do like Board Member Cashman's list. And also, I heard loud and clear the request from Ms. Mayor of the NEA that we need some more money to go into our tables so that, I believe these are her words, people can see their future in the pay tables of the Santa Fe Public Schools. And the issue of some compaction with the 6% raises is one that is a big priority for me, and I'd like to see us address and have good ladders in compensation. Dr. Garcia?
I just ask that you guys let us negotiate, so that don't set a dollar amount or whatnot, but that we just say, you know, that we're going to negotiate and try to consider the compaction. But if you set amounts and or anything like that, particularly on the secretary's salaries, or how much we want to set aside for the salary schedule, it really makes it hard for us to negotiate. So as long as we know that it's a priority, then we can keep that in mind, and then we can discuss it in executive session. But I prefer if you would allow us to not set, not that you did tonight, but I'm just saying prospectively, that we do not talk about dollar amounts publicly because it makes it difficult for us to negotiate.
And as a reminder, we should not be negotiating in public, which I think you just gave us. And however, I'm happy however you want to take us through that, because of course it's hard to also have no numbers on that as we do a budget. But however you want to take us through that, and we can just remind the board, we don't negotiate in public. Vice President Price.
You know, there was a time in this district where we didn't have PE teachers in every school, and we didn't have music in every school, and we didn't have art in every school. And as a school board, we said, this is just not okay. We need to work to change this, and we did. I want us to no longer say that we can't afford this. I want more school nurses, more counselors, and more librarians. And I want us to make it a commitment, and I want us to work towards achieving that, not just to say we can't afford it. I think we can't afford not to.
Board Member Cashman, then Board Member Carrillo.
And obviously that was one of my priorities, and I agree with Board Member Price. And what I worded it a little bit different this year, because I thought we need to, and I agree with it, we need to have a plan to get there. So maybe we can't do everybody this year, but we need to have a plan. And it's important to me to have librarians. They may not be the same librarians that we had 50 years ago. They're technology, digital, but our kids need to learn how to use resources, and you need somebody trained to do that. And, you know, and then also to know a library brings you pleasure. You know, it can give you information, it can give you a way. So I agree with Board Member Price on that. That was number 4 on my priority. So I don't ever forget those 3 categories. Yeah, and so, and having supported myself through college, as working in the library, I know how important libraries are.
I'd agree with both of them, and on the libraries. And the nurses doesn't necessarily have to be an RN, but there's got to be somebody besides the secretary. Yeah, and yeah, we just can't expect our secretaries and our EAs to be doing this work. There was another thought, but it escaped me. Sorry.
Board Member Cashman.
What we maybe should do on nurses is maybe reach out to the community college. Obviously, you know, those are kids that are going with 2-year degrees. I don't think we can afford an RN at every school, because I know.
They graduate RNs.
Yeah, but you know, but the kids, but you know,
and they're
so,
great.
Yeah, but I'm just saying the kids that are going through 4-year programs, they've got a lot of college debt. They're going where the big salaries are. Yeah. So I don't think we can go, but from our community college, they're doing a great job over there, and maybe, you know, maybe we can do that. Yeah.
They do wonderful work. I've had many of their graduates work on me. And I asked them, where did you go to school? Community college. What kind of degree do you have? You'd be surprised how many practices in this district have 2-year, and the doctors and the nurses, 4-year nurses, they love them. They are really good, they are dedicated, and they know what they're doing. So, yep, I stick with RNs.
I think that's a wonderful idea of going to the community college. And on the librarians thing, I do think it's incredibly important. The city is at a point, I think I've mentioned this before, where they are really remaking their libraries. There are some very key positions open in the city of Santa Fe, including the library director. And there are a number of good ideas. It turns out April is Library Appreciation Month. I was actually going to ask that we have a presentation on it, but the agendas have been so packed that we've pulled back on that. But I think there are a lot of opportunities with the city of Santa Fe now, with the new Secretary of Cultural Affairs, who happens to be a Santa Fe High School graduate of the class of 1993, who's overseeing the state libraries. And even in our own district, there's some wonderful ideas that are sort of how to change it up and how we might have, and I think we talked about this at this time last year, but even centralized training with the delivery of library, media, and research services in another fashion in the school sites themselves. And so I would agree that to have a plan and maybe even some ideas along the way as to how we get there is something that I would like to see us pursue.
Madam President, there's
Dr. Garcia.
a meeting on Monday, and we're sending staff because they're planning the new city library. And we'll have someone from Tom Ryan's shop and also from Linda Sink's shop attending that to talk about library science and give our input of our needs in terms of the new re-envisioned city library.
That's wonderful to hear. And they need Tom Ryan in the city libraries, really.
No, let's not say that too loudly.
I said it into my microphone. Anything else? Moving on to advanced planning. And I would echo what Board Member Carrillo said. Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Halford, to all the staff. I'm sorry you had to come in over the weekend, but this was a great presentation, and we really appreciate the hard work that went into this and all the things. On advanced planning, any changes, questions? Yes, Vice President Price.
I think it was Board Member Carrillo who brought this up at the last school board meeting. We don't have board discussion, but I would like to have put on for board discussion next time, moving this meeting back to Tuesday.
Okay. We have that recorded. Yes, got it.
I just want to let Ms. Price know that Rudy did text me. He said this would be positively the only time he wouldn't make the Monday. I just want to let you know that I did receive a message to that effect. Well, it's because I was ragging on him online, telling him, why the heck aren't you here? Yeah, I hear you.
He did. He also sent me a message saying, please give the board and staff my apologies. Actually, he didn't tell me this would be the only one he'd miss. That he sent only to Mr. Carrillo.
And my message was very in caps and all that.
Okay, any other items on advanced planning?
Good.
Yes?
Our calendar starts getting crowded, and we write things in, but they're not put in here, you know, about a dinner or this or that. I know they're not in here, but could you, like, may I request that a supplementary something be sent to our email reminding us of certain dates of certain things that are not in here?
Like
the volunteer recognition.
We've been sending it out to you, but I can ask Alma, Ruth.
If she could just send us like that kind of calendar that you just mentioned, it would be really helpful.
Yes.
Events calendar.
Especially in April and May.
Yeah.
We'll ask her to do that.
That would be wonderful, because they do, sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the individual emails. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, thank you for staying.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks to everybody.
We're lucky to have her.
We are. All right, meeting's adjourned.